But just as a preamble, before we begin the line of questioning, I think one of I've been a journalist for 30 years, and I get very frustrated with our politicians because on a personal basis, they're hugely intelligent and they want very good things. And then you give them a public platform, and then it gets surreal. So as much as politicians talk about wanting to depoliticize our process, our system, they keep politicizing it even more. And that's, I think, one of the last questions that we have in this list. But I think, just as a short preamble, we've had the name of Benedict Anderson invoked, and we live in a very interesting time. And I think Malaysia encapsulates, the kind of anxiety the world is going through at the moment. We are an innately cosmopolitan and worldly society. We are battling now with issues of identity politics. There is a deflation and a lack of faith in the nation state all over the world today. At the same time, there is a really kind of Puritan attempt to reclaim the nation state, to be one pure nation or another kind. I think one of the great wounds in Malaysia is history. And perhaps I can ask you the first question, which is, so much of the objectives and aspirations of our nation from the very beginning has been this idea of national unity. National unity is already there in our history. We live in perhaps one of the most polyglot and cosmopolitan regions in the world. Diversity, hybridity, some would say bastardy, is innate to us. We know no other reality. Yet we have built up some of the hardest and non-fluid identities in the world today. We forget that Malacca was one of the most polyglot societies. When Tommy Perez came as to do a reconnaissance, he said at any given place in Malacca, nothing less than 90 languages were being spoken. We've forgotten all that. It's become a kind of reference for hegemonic power and so on. But this idea of national unity, do you think it's obsolete? And should we be looking elsewhere? Prof.
Actually, it's a very large question. I'll connect it to education because that's where I am. I personally agree with you that the implication, at least, I think kids should learn together so that they can live together. Because if kids are segregated like that, it won't be good. But on the other hand, I have to point out, and I'll use your example again, empathy. I think we should try to understand why national schools are not so national anymore. I myself sent my daughter to Kuan Cheng. And then when she grew up, my wife is a Malay, by the way, when she grew up, she sent both of her kids to Kuan Cheng. 18% of the population in Chinese schools is now non-Chinese. The Chinese schools are the most national of the schools today. In the national schools, the Malay population is 90% or so. So now, I think you have to empathize. Why is it? And I'll tell you why is it. I think the teaching profession has gone down terribly. The quality of teachers is terrible. The racial imbalance in the recruitment of the teachers is very bad. The curriculum content has changed drastically. The Prime Minister himself said that a few weeks ago. He said national schools have primarily become religious schools. Now, I know that from school to school or region to region there is some disparity, but in some schools the religious education is 11 periods per week. Bahasa Melayu is, I think, 8. English is 6. Science is 4. But the major component of our schools today is religion. Now, you have to please understand, non-Muslims are not interested in that. History is being rewritten. We are ashamed of history. Actually, history always was basically the version of those in power. But since the 60s, history has been drastically rewritten. So I think that's why people are not sending their kids to national schools. In fact, I have been told that in the years after Merdeka, the vernacular schools were declining. They were declining. But then came the new policies, and suddenly the vernacular school became more popular. So I think we need to go back to the era when vernacular schools were declining and national schools were rising. So also, if you criticize the vernacular schools, you should also worry about all Malay schools. If you criticize Chinese and Tamil schools, you should also criticize from the Malay nationalistic point of view. You should criticize the hundreds of schools, if not hundreds, I don't know what's the exact number, I have it in my notes, which are conducted in English. If it's nationalism, if it's linguistic nationalism, then English also is not our language. So I think we should not adopt double standards. We should be consistent in principle. If BM is the uniting force, which it can be, then why are some of our universities, some of our Mara science colleges, primarily in English? Why are our elites, and I'm sorry that may include all of you, why are our elites sending our kids to international schools? So the national education policy is okay for me, for my children, because I can't afford to send them to international schools, but it's not okay for you. How come? I want to ask that question. So I think we should be consistent in principle. Where do the ministers send their kids to school? I want to ask you. Where do the top civil servants send their kids to school? I know at one time international schools were not available for Malaysians, were not. The policy was deliberately changed by way of perundangan kecil to allow locals to send their kids. So I think in the ideal circumstances, I totally agree, we should learn together so we can live together. But you've got to empathize with why people are not sending. I was not happy to send my kids to national schools because of the quality of the education. My kids are coming back and saying, Chegu kata, cannot send Deepavali cards, cannot send Chinese New Year cards, cannot send Christmas cards, because I said, this is rubbish. You don't listen to a Chegu. I have to tell you something different.